Today's guest on the Life and a Living podcast is the phenomenally successful Andy Andrews. Now, Andy has got so many accolades, it would take far too long to go through all of them. But the New York Times has said of Andy that he is one of the most influential people in the United States. He's got numerous books to his credit, including The Traveler's Gift, The Noticer, who've been bestsellers for a long, long time, and more recently published in 2019 is The Bottom of the Pool, and we talk a bit about The Bottom of the Pool in the interview. But Andy has also been advisor to 4 US presidents. He's been hired as a consultant by so many organizations that would be so well known. Zig Ziglar, the great Zig Ziglar, referred to him as the greatest speaker he has ever seen and heard, which is great coming from Zig Ziglar. And what you'll hear from Andy is actually an extraordinarily simple but powerful message, which is all about questioning and challenging and not following what everybody else is doing. If you do what everybody else is doing, you're going to get what they are getting. But if you want to do something significant, as he says, go the other way. But it's about how you think. It's about how you question. It's about how you challenge. It's about how you keep digging down, as he said to the title of his book, to the bottom of the pool, where you really get down where there's nowhere else to go, but you're at that foundation. And he talks about foundational thinking, how you go about really developing the muscle of foundational thinking. So this is a fantastic interview, and I say it's fantastic because Andy is such an amazing guest. I think I asked fewer questions in this interview than I have in many gone by, but I really want you to tune in and listen to this because there's a fountain of knowledge. There's a great opportunity to listen close up to one of the great communicators in the world. And as I say, one of the most influential people in the United States. So sit back and enjoy it. If you want to get other interviews or great interviews, I've been so fortunate to really have some great people on the podcast, then go to my website, www.johnmurphyinternational.com, and you will find loads more content there. But in the meantime, sit back, relax, and just soak in all of the good stuff that Andy has to offer. Andy, it's a great pleasure to have you with us here today. And just as I started, the aircraft decided to fly over my office. But it's not every day that I have what the New York Times would say, someone who has quietly become one of the most influential people in America. Are you even slightly embarrassed by the fact that they said that? Or do you just love it?
I'm honored to be here, but I think that quietly is probably the key word there, So
not exactly a well-kept secret, though. I mean, with the amount of books and everything else, it's not a well-kept secret.
Well, you're very kind. I appreciate being here with you, and I think it's fascinating that you are in the south of France, and here I am in the south of Alabama.
Yeah, I know.
My place doesn't sound quite as romantic as yours does.
Well, you haven't seen my place either, so you can't really say too much. But it is beautiful here. Can I quote some things that you said that I love? And they're kind of a bunch of things, and I hope I can get you exactly right. Things you said, just because you're doing the best you can do doesn't mean you're doing the best you can. What you truly believe is so powerful you cannot perform against it. What you believe has been created by what you think, and you cannot believe everything you think. What if you're believing the wrong thing? And I go, okay. So that kind of stops me in my track and said, so what do I do with that? So maybe unpack that a little bit for me.
Okay. I help people. I work with companies just like you do. And I help people compete in a way their competition doesn't know a game is going on. And what that means to me is that we got to do something different. If the one thing everybody carries with them is a knowledge of their own industry and a belief system that they have. And as I, through the years, began to work with more and more successful people, and then kind of ended up working with some people who were at the very top of their industry, well, like, for instance, there's a coach here in America. He's a college football coach. His name is Nick Saban. And Nick Saban has gone from being one of the greatest football coaches ever to being in the conversation for the greatest football coach of all time. And so I look at Nick and I say, you know, what seminar do you go to? What book would you read? Where, you know, what consultant could you possibly bring in who knows more about football than you know? And so when you look at somebody like that, there's a certain thought process they have. And if you can help them look beyond what they think, then there's the area for growth. You know, if you've ever in your life, John, have been sure about something. I mean, you knew it and you could argue it and you could win the argument. And then you found out 3 or 4 months later, that wasn't exactly right. You know, we've all done that. Okay. So that brings up the question, is it possible that there is something right now that you know for sure? Is it possible that there might be more to it, that your knowledge might be incomplete, that you might be wrong? And you would say, yeah, it's possible. Okay, well, then my question is, if it's possible, we have to understand we don't know what subject that may cover or how many subjects in our lives that may cover. And so there's a ton of room beyond what we know. You know, it's not the things we don't know that keep us from growing. The things that keep us from growing are the things we know for sure, because we stop there.
And is that because we're just making the assumption that we know all there is to know about that particular subject matter?
Right. There's a curious thing about that, especially for business people, that a lot of people don't understand that something can be true and not be the truth. And I guess a good example of that would be like if you took a blind person in to see an animal and you said, okay, you've never seen this animal before. You've never even heard of it, but it's called an elephant. And we're going to give you a few minutes to look around, feel around, and come tell us what an elephant is like and how it could be used in society. And so a few minutes later, you know, the blind person may come out and say, okay, an elephant is very tall, very wide, kind of flat, very dense. You could use it for a gate. You might could use several of them for a wall. Okay, well, that's true. All of that's true. It's not the truth, because the truth connotes a foundation, the bottom of the pool, you know, as far as you can go. And so until we know the truth about an elephant, we would never have a complete picture of what one looks like or how many ways it could be used. And so the point is that people in general, and especially in business, many times we stop with what is true. We stop there. We quit searching because it's true. It's the answer. It is producing results. Now, until we get to the truth, we'll never produce results that we could consider the best.
And is that because we've got a fixed mindset, or we don't have an open mindset? Because it is kind of a mindset thing, because you come across people that have just got very closed mindsets. That's it. And it fits in that box. And that's all it is. And I don't really want to hear a counter argument or a counter opinion to that. So is that purely a mindset thing, or is just that I can't know what I don't know?
I think it's more than a mindset thing, because I think that those kind of people that you just described, they aren't going to listen to you anyway. They aren't going to listen to me anyway. They aren't listening to this podcast. You know, they're not. And yet, even those of us who continue to search, I mean, sometimes we kind of stop because we think we have found the answer. We found, and yet what we found is true. And it is important to continue to go, to do what I call going to the bottom of the pool, to continue to go down, 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 deeper, 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 until you can't go anymore. And you know, with the metaphor of the bottom of the pool, if you were trying to go up out of the water and everybody's just playing on the surface and you're seeing how high they can get out of the water like a dolphin does, okay, then you have a limited amount of power. It's how much water can you grab? How hard can you kick? But when you go to the bottom of the pool and get down and push off that concrete, you can never get as much power as you do when you get to the foundation of something.
Okay. Can I talk about, because your book, the latest book you have is called The Bottom of the Pool. And,
Right.
and you talk about, in that you talk about the three pieces of information that inform our lives. And they are, this is how it's done, this is why it's done, and this is the result that you can expect. And to a very large extent, you know, because you're very much in the kind of self-development, people development world. And to a large extent, you kind of think, well, that's just what I'm looking for. Tell me how it's done, you know, tell me why it's done, and then tell me the result I can get, and ergo I'm off. So I've now got a formula. But what you're actually saying is almost the contra of that, because you're saying it's an insidious trap.
It
Just
is.
Expand on that.
It is a trap, because you see that particular mindset in almost every industry, in almost every social function. This is how it's done. This is why we do it this way. And these are the results that you expect. Now, I'll tell you, this is kind of curious how I kind of came to understand that was a trap. It is because a bunch of years ago, as a speaker and an author, I had people, agents, book speakers, speakers bureaus, and I had them tell me that there was a certain amount and I could not be booked for any more than that, that was as high as, because they had kind of gently raised the price for years. And then they got to a point and they said, that's as much as somebody like you can make. And I was like, well, who's somebody like me? And they said, well, you haven't got a gold medal. You don't have a Super Bowl ring. You haven't done anything with the World Cup. You weren't the hero of some international disaster and ended up in magazine headlines across the world. You weren't the president of any company. You don't have a television show. You're just a guy and you talk fast and you're kind of funny. And there is a limit to what somebody like that can make. And so I got to thinking about it, and I thought, well, that's true. But there's got to be something I can do. And I realized there was a truth beyond that. I realized that if I helped people produce actual measurable results that were far beyond anything anybody in their industry had ever done, I mean, right? If some lady speaker, they say, well, she charges $1 million a speech. Well, a lot of people will go, you got to be kidding me. She's out of her mind. Well, but wait, here's what's happened. All the CEOs everywhere that have worked with her have all agreed that every time she speaks, within 6 months, the company makes $100 million. Well, see, at that point, the question is not, are we really going to pay this lady $1 million to speak? The question becomes, if she speaks twice in a day, will she do it for 1.5? Right? Because the results are there. Okay. And so I began to look at how in the world would somebody like me go to a company that I don't really know anything about their industry and help them double or triple or quadruple their results. How could I possibly do that? And I began to realize that there is a type of thinking that goes on in every industry and every social circumstance. And it is that singular thing that this is the way we do it. This is the way it's been done. This is the best way. This is why we do it this way. These are the results you can expect if you do it that way. And And so as I started to go to the other side, one of the first people that I told about this was Coach Saban that we talked about earlier. Yeah. And I looked at this guy and I thought, every football coach in America, at least, talks to their team about giving everything they've got from the snap of the ball to the official blowing the whistle. If you can give me 100% from the snap to the whistle, just the snap to the whistle, then we got a good chance of winning. Well, every coach tells their team that. And so I got to thinking, if you could figure out how to not only compete from the snap to the whistle like everybody else is, but also legitimately compete from the whistle to the next snap while everybody else is standing around, then you'd run them off the field. And so how do you legitimately compete that way? Well, it won't be doing like everybody's doing. It won't be, because we're not looking for the results that you can expect if you do this. I mean, I'm a nobody. And so, nobody's gonna pay me a lot of money to come into their company just to take pictures with me. I got to have real, measurable results. And so I started looking in other ways. I started saying, okay, what do they do? All right, so because I want to know, this is the way they do it. This is what they can expect. Okay, I don't want to expect that. I want to expect at least double that. And so what would we have to do? Where does the real increase come from? And I began to examine that and began to look and try to figure. And it was very curious to me that as I began to find these little things, and you will love this, John. One night I was sitting on the couch. I had just gotten through talking with the CEO, and I got off the phone and I told my wife the numbers that he had told me. And my wife said, "How are you doing this?" And I said, "What?" She said, how are you? You don't know anything about what they're doing. How are you helping them, turn like the instance was a company that had been 19 years to get to 5.4 billion. And in 1 year, they did 11.2 billion, which is exactly 101% increase. Wow. So almost exactly double. The next year they did 17 billion. The next year, 22. In the fifth year, they just ended up at 39.1 billion. And just in April, they did 5.6 billion. And the CEO sent me a message, an email saying, "Coach, can you believe this? We did in a month what we had done in a year after 19 years." Well, my wife says, "Well, how are you doing this?" And I said, "Well, it's a philosophy. And here's the philosophy that guides everything I figure with them. Here's the philosophy. If somebody came to me and they said, in an airport or something, they said, 'Hey, we're only going to see you now and we'll never see you again. And we need you to give us something in 30 seconds that would help us increase our income 15% a year, every year for a decade.' I could not do that. And the reason is because that's the way normal great companies increase over and over and over, 15, 20% a year, decade, year after year after year. And I couldn't do that because that's the way normal companies do it. And they have a way that is done. They know why they do it that way. And that's the result they can expect. So I couldn't help anybody if they wanted me to do that. However, if somebody came to me in an airport and they said, "We're never going to see you again, and we need you to give us something in 30 seconds that would give us a chance at doubling our results in a year," I could do that very easily. Because what I would say in less than 30 seconds, I would say, okay, examine your industry, watch what everybody's doing, and turn around and go the other way. because you said you wanted a chance, right? You wanted a chance at doubling. Okay. Well, do you look at your industry? Is anybody doubling? Do you see anybody doubling? Has anybody ever doubled? Okay. If you want a chance, for God's sake, don't do what they're doing. So the answers for great results are always beside what everybody else is doing. It's just out of the realm of how they're thinking. And so it's what I try to do is to come alongside a CEO or an executive board and say, you can hire all the consultants you want with this business, but because I don't know about it, I can have you thinking in ways that you would never think because you know how to do it.
So if you go back to the thinking part, so if I interpret what you're saying is that you're changing the way they think. You must love it when companies say, industry standards are this or best practices this. That must be kind of manna from heaven for you when you actually hear people talking about that, because what you're doing is actually saying, well, just push that to one side and go the opposite direction. Is what you're doing changing the way they're thinking, changing the way they're operating, changing? What is it is it just changing the way they're thinking? Is that the starting place?
That is the starting place, because there, how we talked about a few minutes, the true versus the truth. John, you and I we've read so many books, we've heard so many speakers, and how many times have we heard people say, your choices determine where you end up in life. It is your choices that determine your destiny. There's one thing you want to do for your kids, help them make good choices. Well, see, that's a perfect example of something that is true, because that is true, because your choices, what are you choosing? You're choosing an action. The action creates results. Results over time become your culture. That becomes who you are. And so your choices do determine your destiny. However, there is a foundation below that, because if all we tell our kids is make good choices, it's like telling them to go in the backyard with a quarter and flip heads every time. Unless we know how these choices are good, and unless we know how they are made, how to determine what a good one is, unless we as adults can explain that to them, it's kind of a flip of the coin.
Is that what you mean by foundational thinking? Is that what you talk when you talk about foundational thinking? Is that what you mean? And if it is, can you just elaborate on what you mean by foundational thinking?
Because the foundation of where you will end up is not choices. The foundation is your thinking. That's as far below, that's as to the bottom of the pool as we can get. Because consider this, every choice you've ever made in your life, every choice you will ever make in your life is totally determined by how you think, what you think about, how long you think about it, what you decide you don't want to think about so it doesn't distract you from thinking about what you got to think about so that you can decide. It's your thinking. Now, the reason this is great news is because, yes, our thinking is the foundation. Yes, our thinking determines our choices. However, we can choose how we think. We can choose it. That is perspective. When people say, well, there's a glass half full, there's a glass half empty. If you ask the average person on the street, what is perspective? And they say, well, it's how you see something. Do you see it half empty or do you see it half full? And that's true, but it's not the truth, because the truth is it's not just how you see something, it's how you choose to see it, because the glass is what it is. It is a measurable amount of water in that glass. It's not half empty or half full. It's how you choose to see it. It's the same thing, but how you choose to see that will determine your results in life. We want to hire people who are glass half full people. We want to put people who are glass half full people into leadership positions. We don't want to be around glass half empty people. Nobody wants to follow somebody's glass half empty. But it is a choice how we see it, and our thinking determines that.
I'm just reminded of that, because I have it on my wall here, is the foundation from an A in was we don't see things as they are. We see them as we are.
Boy, isn't that true? And isn't that the truth?
The other thing that I want to go back to what you're talking about, the bottom of the pool, and just to elaborate on that. I know it's the title of your book, but why is the answer at the bottom of the pool?
I think it's because that is as far as we can go. That's the foundation. I think a lot of times when a great example is watching politicians and watching them on television, and you'll hear somebody say, well, why does this, what is the situation here? Why does this happen? And the politician will give an answer, and everybody will kind of sit around and go, yeah, well, that's true. And then they'll give another answer. Now, they just gave an answer that was true, but there's nothing anybody is solving. They're not getting to the bottom of the situation. They're not getting to the bottom of the pool. They're just giving an answer that everybody goes, yeah, that's right. But instead of leaving it there, we could say, okay, that's true. Now, why is that? Okay, well, that requires some thinking to determine why that happened. And then when you get that one, you can go, okay, so why is that? And you can go a little lower. And until you can't ask why anymore, until you can't go any deeper, there is where the solvable component is. That will inform you as to what your direction is, where you got to go from there. And that's why a lot of times in our lives, we don't go to the bottom of the pool because our parents stopped us from asking why when we were 6 years old. We would say, why?
Just stop,
Daddy, yeah. And they said, please stop, no more. Don't tell me, don't ask me why on anything. And so we don't. Yeah. And then as adults, we ask why when something's wrong. And then when we get an answer, we go, okay, that's it. And we don't go any further. And another thing we do with why, we should, instead of only using why when something's wrong, we should look at things that are going right and go, why is that working like that? Why is that working so well on Thursdays? Why is that at 10 a.m., before 10 a.m. on Thursdays? Why is it? Because there's tons of people that can harness a principle. There's tons of people who understand a principle and know how to use it. But until you know why that principle works as it does, you will never be able to harness the power of it to use it in other areas. And that's what we're trying to do, is everybody's using this principle this way. They all know how to use it. We want to use it in other areas of our life that they don't even recognize that it will have context.
It reminds me of the kind of I think it's Socrates who said it anyway, that the unexamined life isn't worth living. That we really have got to be examining everything that's going on. And we tend to only examine when something goes wrong. We don't actually, that's the point you're making, we don't examine when things are going well, That's
exactly right.
One of the other things you say that, ordinary people compare themselves to everybody else's results, but extraordinary achievers compare themselves with their potential. And I suppose what sparked when I was kind of reading that, I was saying, and I get what you mean by that, but sometimes it's hard for people to actually really see their own potential. How do you help somebody to actually see that there is more than what they're giving and delivering right now?
And that is, the more successful a person is, the harder that is to do. The harder that is for them to do. Because I think that when people are in kind of a mid-level situation, they think, well, obviously there's more to achieve, and so our potential is kind of like a carrot on a stick, right? It's always kind of in front of us. And another great example, just once again, is Coach Saban. And here's a guy who's won 6 national championships. He just, after the NFL draft, he just became the first college coach in history to have a first-round draft choice into the NFL from all 22 positions. 11 on offense, 11 on defense. Very first coach in history to have first. And so he's coaching these people very well. Now, I remember being in a room full of people one time, and they were winning the game by like 35 points. And they get to, there's like a minute and a half to go. And one of the guys on the offensive line makes a false start. The referee throws the flag, and the television camera shows Nick on the sidelines kind of going nuts. And so the people in the room with me, somebody said, okay, coach, okay, you've already beat them. Come on. But see, I knew what was going on. I knew that he was not competing against the other team. He was competing with his team's potential. And they were just about to go through an entire game without a single penalty. And right there at the end, somebody's mind, they got their mind on something else, so they weren't concentrating, and they made that mental error. And so in one way, though, as good a coach as Nick is, in one way, he had to kind of been glad about it. Now I got something to get after him about. Now we got something to work on, you know.
It wasn't perfect. It wasn't
right.
Perfect.
It wasn't perfect. It wasn't perfect. Don't think you're so great.
Andy, can I ask you, because when I look at what you've achieved, what you've done, I mean, you're a prolific author, you're very successful, you know, all of that in consulting and speaking, all of that. What's exciting for you right now, and when you're looking into the future? What's the thing that really kind of grabs you and excites you, and that also challenges you that little bit?
Well, you know, this worldwide pandemic thing, this coronavirus that has changed a lot of things. In one way, I'm like everybody else. I'm nervous about it, careful how we communicate, careful who we're around, that kind of thing. But in another way, I also know that our worst times become our best times because we think to different conclusions during those times. We're forced, you know, people are scared of change. People really try to avoid change, but they forget that even the best thing that ever happened in their life happened. And you could say, well, that's the best thing in your life, but for that to happen, something had to change. You know, it's not just the worst thing that's happened because things change. And so sometimes we're forced into those changes. And so right now, I'm in a studio that we created here in Orange Beach, Alabama. It's at a place called The Wharf. And, you know, I live it's a tiny town. We don't have a studio in this town. And I've been traveling for years and years and years. And, you know, I'm talking to you, and I'm thinking when I get off this podcast, I'm going to be telling Matt, the technician right over here, I'm going to tell Matt, put John Murphy at the top of the list, man, because I have a podcast too. And I'm like, I like talking to this guy, and I want him on, you know, if he'll do our podcast, I want to have John Murphy as a guest on our podcast. And then we started the other day, you know, there's so many opportunities on social media platforms. We were in the studio, I don't know, 3 weeks ago, and it was Central Time here in America. It was 12:03. And I asked Matt, I said, hey, on Facebook, could we go live like at 12:15 and do just like a lunchtime thing? I mean, we wouldn't even advertise it or anything. We'd just kind of go live and talk to people. And he said, sure. And so I said, okay, well, let's do it. And so we did. And thousands of people, it were like, we couldn't believe it. And so after we got off, we said, we got to have a name for this. So we started calling it the Blue Plate Special. It's lunchtime learning and laughter. And we said, no, we can't do it every day. And we don't know what days we'll do it. So we'll always make it at 12:15 Central Standard Time. and just have people just like click their notification buttons on Facebook so that if we go live, it'll notify them. And we do it a couple of times a week, and we've had guests on it. We're just silly and have fun and consider things and talk. And people will ask questions, and we'll talk to them all over the world. And that isn't something I would have ever considered if we weren't just kind of in here one day, just, Matt and I social distancing
But isn't it extraordinary? Isn't it extraordinary, though? I mean, the reach that you can have. I mean, I think that one of the things that I've talked about in my own family, because I've got, for example, I've got 3 daughters. I've got one in San Francisco. I'm here in France. I have 1 daughter in San Francisco, 2 in Melbourne, Australia, right? I've got friends in different parts. So, but the technology allows you to communicate and to reach those people. Can you imagine in this pandemic time, if we didn't have the technology, what it would be like that we couldn't communicate? We wouldn't have the ability to actually have that, those channels. I mean, it just would have been, however tough it has been, but can you imagine how tough it would have been without the technology? So we are very blessed for what we have.
Yeah. And in every time, we always see things that can turn out well. If you continue to, if you think like everybody else, we had a hurricane here one time and everybody was going, gosh, this is the worst thing that could happen to everybody. Well, not to everybody. We had friends who were roofers, and in the next 2 or 3 years, they made more money than they would have made in the rest of their lives. Yeah. Home Depot was.
Yeah. In every situation, out of the ashes of every single situation, the eagles do fly and come out of it.
Boy, that's great. I'm going to write that down.
I think I borrowed it from somebody else, but it's true, isn't it? I mean, it always happens. No matter how bad it is, you go back to the whole economy imploding in 2008, and yes, it was devastating for so many people in so many sectors, but for other people, it was their ticket to glory. And that was the joy of it. Andy, I'm really conscious of the time, and I'm because I've gone way over the time that I said I would keep you, but you've been such a joy to interview. I've gone way over.
You are awesome, man.
But listen, can I ask you, and I really feel slightly humbled asking somebody who's been as prolific a writer as you are to talk about a book that's had an impact on you other than your own.
Okay, yeah. And that, there are a lot of them. I read a lot. I read for different reasons. I read some people, I read some authors to learn how to write. I read some authors to learn more about how to tell stories. I read nonfiction to get facts. I read fiction to fire my imagination in a way that the facts cannot. And that's why I recommend people read fiction and nonfiction, because if you only know the facts, but you don't develop the imagination to use the facts in a way everybody else is using them, right? And so you want to have both. But there is a book that was written before I was born. And a friend turned me onto this book not too long ago. Well, maybe a couple of years ago. And I've read this book 3 times, and it is called The Old Man and the Boy. And it was written by Robert Roark. Almost nobody has heard of it.
I've never heard of it.
Yeah, almost nobody has heard of that book. And I when I got it, it's a paperback now. It was written in, I think, 1957. And they used to call Robert Roark the poor man's Hemingway. And this story, it's a story about a boy living with his grandparents in the 1920s before the Great Depression. And his granddad teaches him to fish and to camp and to hunt and how to find sea turtles and how to catch fish and find the ducks. And it's all these lessons of life. But the writing is unbelievable. I told my wife on the cover of this book, it says over 150,000 copies sold. And I was halfway through that book, and I told my wife, I said, you know what? I'm embarrassed to have sold millions of copies of anything when a book this great has only sold 150,000 copies. But I love that book, The Old Man and the Boy.
Oh, I must get that. That you really sold me on that one. That gets added to the list. Second question I ask everyone, because I'm fascinated by, is daily rituals, what they are and what they do for you.
I get up, and before I do email, before I do text, before I do anything business wise, I get a shower and all like that. But then when I am ready to kind of start, I sit down and I'm quiet. And, I have a book. It's called a Book of Wisdom that I read sometimes. That is, it's stuff that King Solomon wrote, and it's every, you can find things that kings wrote, right? Because they save everything. I mean, if King Henry VIII ate with that fork, you can bet it's in a museum somewhere. And so everything they wrote, people kept too. Well, some of the kings were ridiculous or stupid or something, but some of them were very wise. And King Solomon, they say, was the wealthiest person in the history of the world, and a lot of historians say he was also the wisest. And so I started collecting a lot of the things that he has written, and just finding it wherever I could. And it was very curious, because he writes like a king. He doesn't write like a writer. It's like kind of do this, don't do this, do this. And when I first started looking at some of that, I was very curious about it, because some of the things I understood, they made perfect sense. But some of the things I didn't really understand why he would say that. And so I'm always asking why. I want to try to go to the bottom of the pool, right? And so I would look at that and I would say, why would he tell people that? Why would the king be telling? Because, he's written stuff about how to do your business, when to do your business, how to make money, what to do with your money when you make it, how, about how finding a spouse, what to do with your kids. And I'm like, why would he write all this? Well, his dad, King Solomon's father, was King David, the guy who beat Goliath, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well, King David was a conqueror, and the descriptions of his cities, it was kind of an armed camp. But Solomon, his son, was wealthy beyond belief, and he built this city, and so you think, a conqueror, how does he make his money? Well, he goes out and he takes it. Okay. But a king that becomes that wealthy, the only way he's making money is taxes. That's the only way he could possibly make money. And so I'm looking at this and thinking, okay, he's telling these people this because he knows, he's telling them how to run their businesses because he's telling them everything he knows to be the truth, because he wants their businesses to be great. Because the better their businesses are,
the more taxes
they pay. And then he tells them about their marriage and tells them about their kids and tells them the truth, the best he can figure, because he knows that if they're not happy at home, their businesses aren't going to be great. So even if this guy was only doing it from a mercenary reason, from a mercenary viewpoint, it is such good stuff. And so every morning I read from that. And then sometimes I read about King David too, because King David was kind of a screw up. In a way, I have two boys. My wife and I have two boys. And so I look at David and I go, good grief. If they had written if they had Xanax back then, he would have never written anything, because this guy's, he's happy, he's sad, he's mad, he's, grateful. It's just crazy. It's all over the map. And I think, he makes a lot of big mistakes in his life. But then I think, okay, I'm kind of a screw up too. I'm kind of all over the map sometimes too. I've made a lot of mistakes in my life. And yet if somebody like that can raise a kid like he did, then maybe there's hope for me as a parent. And so I, that's my daily ritual. The first thing I do is try to read some of that and be quiet and think through it and calm myself before the day. But I like to do that before I do email, before I do anything.
Well, that's it's almost kind of going back to your bottom of the pool, isn't it? That you're actually digging down every morning and going down to kind of just asking the why until you actually get to the core of something. And it's a great way to start your day because it frames your day to a large extent. And you've also exercised your brain, which is no harm either, in a very positive way. You're a great believer in biographies, aren't they? That's really what's kind of started. We started with your reading was with biographies, which was an interesting way to start.
I love biographies because they're a great way to be mentored by people who the jury's in. Yeah. The jury's in on their life, and I mean, you know what you got. And so, there a few years ago, I saw like some of the people working with my social media, they had put a quote up there by some modern day person. And I got to thinking about it, and I went and I had a meeting with everybody, and I said, okay, we can quote my books because I'm writing them, and I can take the blame if something screws up. And we can quote dead people, but but don't put a quote up by Bill Cosby, right? Because I mean, look how that turned out. And so because the jury's still out on people when they're alive, and so I always want to give grace to people, and it's not that I won't quote people, but I generally won't do it in print. I mean, I won't do it in print, but because I think biographies are a great way to be. There are people who say, "Well, I can't find a mentor." Fine, that's fine. Go get a biography. Wouldn't you rather be mentored by Winston Churchill and Abraham Lincoln anyway? Yeah. I mean, wouldn't you rather? And so, there are and biographies I think are important across the board, not just the ones of incredibly famous people. I always like to find the biographies of the people that were around the famous people.
Yeah, because they've also got a perspective and a different perspective as well. And it can be really interesting to actually talk to them. Andy, you have been extremely generous with your time. I want to thank you. It's been a real honor to have you on. We'll have everywhere. I mean, people know where to get you because you're so well known. They will find you. So I'm not going to even ask you your email address. It'll be in the show notes, but people will be able to find you. But it has been an absolute honor to have you on the show. And I want to thank you for giving so much of your time. So generously.
Buddy, really great. I appreciate it. And while I've got you here publicly, listen, sometime in the next few months, if you don't mind, I would love to have you as a guest on my podcast, The Professional Noticer.
Well, it will be an honor, and I'd be thrilled to do that. So thank you for the invitation.
All right, buddy.
In the meantime, you have a great day, and thank you again.
You too. Thank you, John.